This meeting is being recorded.
Hello and welcome to the final weekly Mentor Coronavirus Q&A session, and thank you for joining us today. The contents of this webinar do not purport to provide any financial, investment or professional advice, and nothing in the content of this webinar shall be deemed to constitute the provision of financial investment or other professional advice in any way. During today's session, we will keep you up to date with the new announcements from this week, what we can and can't do with restructuring, business travel, and the working from home, working from the office dilemma. We'll also be referring to our own Mentor Live system throughout, and you can register to use this free of charge by clicking on the Coronavirus Read More button on the Mentor website. As we mentioned last week, this is the current in the weekly series of COVID-19 webinars from Mentor. This doesn't mean we'll be gone for good, but we will be taking a short break. We will be back next month with a new and improved webinar, and our new focus will be on how to help your business not just survive, but thrive in a post-COVID world. I'm Michael Avon, and I'm joined by three of Mentor's specialists. We have Catherine Watmore, Nick Sorrett for Employment Law, and Claire Frost for Health and Safety. All participants are on listen only, and we encourage you to ask questions as we go along via the Q&A button. When we leave the webinar, you will also be asked to give us your feedback, as we'd really value hearing what you think and what else you'd like us to help you with when we return for the new series. We try to answer as many questions as we can during these weekly sessions, but we can't get to all of them. If yours isn't answered, we do use your questions to update our FAQs within the coronavirus area on Mentor Live. So let's get started then. I'm going to start with some of the important announcements from earlier in the week, not the announcement which has just happened today. We will come to that later. But if we start off with a question for you, Nick. Now, the big news from earlier in the week was, of course, that face masks are compulsory in retail. Now, they were in Scotland and they will be for England from the 24th of July. My question for you, Nick, is what if staff won't wear them?
Thanks for taking the time, everybody, to join the webinar. Yes, this is a fair question. Face masks will apply in retail settings from the 24th of July. They already do in Scotland. And of course, the issue is whether staff can be asked to wear them. Well, the answer is yes, they can. First thing to say is that general exemptions apply to staff in retail settings in the same way that they apply to customers, and these are broadly carried over from the rules on public transport. So people with health conditions in particular that mean they can't wear them. Either they have a physical disability or a mental impairment that means that they're not comfortable wearing them. They don't have to wear them. So that's the first thing to note. In terms of shops and retail premises, there are specific rules for staff. Now, staff don't have to wear them, firstly, in food handling settings, where the mask could compromise other hygiene practices that are already in place to ensure food safety. Secondly, staff who work predominantly in non-customer facing areas, in the back rooms, warehouse spaces and whatever, they don't have to wear them. Staff don't have to wear them outside store opening hours. So if they're restocking in the evenings or in the morning before the shop opens, don't need to wear them. And they don't need to wear them in customer facing areas if there's a 2-metre social distancing in place or a physical partition such as a perspex screen. So those are circumstances where employees don't have to wear them. It's also recognised in the regulations, and these are the Scottish regulations, but we're very much expecting the English ones will be very similar, that wearing masks for long uninterrupted periods may be uncomfortable. So the suggestion is that businesses do give opportunities for staff to temporarily remove face coverings, and that might be in sort of letting them go to the back room or letting them have something akin to a smoking break where they go outdoors and are able just to sort of take their mask off and have a breather. So essentially those are the rules. If you can't get staff to wear them, so like all these things, first thing really is to discuss staff's concerns after you've articulated to them exactly what the expectation is and what the exceptions are, and to try and deal with those individually, step by step. In terms of whether it can be enforced, well, there are likely to be rules on obeying reasonable management instructions and reasonable health and safety instructions in any employee or staff handbook or contract of employment. So ultimately, and this certainly wouldn't be the first step, but this could be escalated through a disciplinary process. So that's my view on it.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Nick. So that's the employment law sort of side of it, but there is a health and safety aspect to this. So I'm going to come to Claire. Now, Nick did touch on there, what types of staff should be wearing face masks. But from a health and safety perspective, should our staff within the stores, the offices, the other workplaces wear these as well?
Hi, Michael. Thanks. That's a good question. Firstly, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking your afternoon to come and get some guidance and knowledge. The answer isn't a straightforward one. You need to have a pragmatic and sensible approach when you're looking at whether you think your staff should wear it. Obviously, the government hasn't yet stipulated offices and workspaces like that, but watch this space. We don't know whether that's going to change. But the main thing is have a look, go back to basics. Look at your risk assessment. Look at your COVID risk assessment you've got in place. Look at the controls. As Nick said, what have you got in place there? The main thing that an employer should be looking at, firstly, is proximity reduction and duration of time in company of others. Then obviously your screening. Also have a look, are there alternative ways of working? So can you explore and consider other practices such as engineering controls? Could you look at dust suppression, local exhaust ventilations, reduce the need for face coverings in that area if you did feel that you would require face covering to support you? But the main thing is just look at your risk assessment and also go on to the Mentor Hub. There's loads of guidance on face coverings and also risk assessments that you can look at, or have a chat with your consultant because they're more than able to help sort of guide you through and have a look at what task, what job and what areas you're in, because those things will be a huge factor as well.
Fabulous, thank you. But just take a bit further for you, Claire. What are the actual implications for the employer if they're not enforcing the masks?
Yeah, it's a good question. Nick touched on it briefly. You could have obviously legal implications for it. There are possible within health and safety regulation. There is the personal protective equipment regulation that sets out employers have responsibility, obviously, to make their employees wear the PPE that they've deemed is required. No matter how uncomfortable that conversation is, unfortunately, it is down to the employer. But the main thing at the moment that I think we need to take into consideration with face coverings is the reputation and customer confidence, especially if you're a customer-facing area at the moment. The customers that are coming in are not going to be used to wearing face coverings. This is a very new thing for a lot of people, is saying you have to do this. So a natural human being response to you have to is I don't want to. So as an employer and as a business owner, if you can get your obviously employees to wear it, you may find that your customers will feel a bit more comfortable in wearing it as well. So it's less confrontational approach in needing to address customers that aren't wearing them. It might help support the wearing of it inside, and just your reputation. It will show that you've got a good key focus on COVID and you're wanting to make sure everyone's safe and secure is probably the way to view it at the moment.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Now, I understand that restructuring and then redundancies is a big part of what's going on at the moment. We have questions on this every week, and this week is no exception. So my first question is for you, Nick, on this one. So, Nick, I've brought some staff back from furlough, and to be honest, business isn't picking up as well as we'd expect, and this person doesn't anticipate needing the others back. So can I just make the people who are on furlough redundant and keep who are brought back in?
Well, in a word, no. And you're right, Michael, we are getting a lot of these queries. It's really sad. As the situation develops, it is becoming clearer to what extent business will pick up, and it may take in many areas much longer than was originally anticipated. And businesses are right to be thinking about making decisions. A couple of points to bear in mind, though, is that the furlough scheme does continue until the 31st of October, albeit that employers will have to pay more towards that. And also bear in mind the possible impact of the recent cut in VAT in the hospitality sector and the Eat Out to Help Out campaign. So all of these things may give businesses a bit more of a boost, to avoid having to make decisions now. But you may have to consider redundancies. What you can't do is simply select those employees who are still on furlough for redundancy. It's very likely to be unfair because you won't be able to show that you've selected them on the basis of any fair and justifiable criteria. And it may also amount to unlawful discrimination because the people who may remain on furlough may be those with care responsibilities or some form of disability if they're shielding. So you've got to be really careful that you just don't automatically select those people. But actually, in terms of considering redundancies, yes, of course, you can be doing that. You should be taking advice on it. And we very much can support clients with that if they're thinking of that. But just not bringing back the people on furlough is not the right way to go about it. And added to which, of course, you don't necessarily retain the right people for your business going forward. So it's really important to have a fair process.
Right. That makes sense. So thank you, Nick. Catherine, I have a question coming your way, actually. One of our first questions we had today, quite simply, can I use furlough grants to pay redundancy money?
Well, thanks, Mike, and hello, everybody, and thanks for inviting me back to this final of our webinars. Yes, the answer is you can. The government has now made it absolutely clear that employers can use the furlough grant to pay notice pay where employees remain on furlough during their notice period, obviously so long as the employee has been furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks by the 1st of July. So just to be clear, when employees are made redundant, they may be entitled to statutory redundancy pay, and the furlough grant doesn't cover that. That's something for the employers to pay. And then notice as set out in their contract of employment. And employers have the option of either requiring employees to remain in employment during that notice period or to pay them a lump sum, what's known as payment in lieu of notice, and then the employment ends immediately. So to be very clear, payment in lieu of notice can't be recovered under the furlough grant, but if the employee doesn't work their notice because they're furloughed and they remain in employment until the end of the notice period, then the employer can claim the furlough grant, subject, of course, to the current limits, 80%. But as Nick said, that will be changing over the time. But I think it's just worth pointing out that generally speaking, the employer has to top up that 80% furlough pay to contractual notice pay during the 100% during the notice period. But that's something that we would recommend taking advice on, just to check for each individual employee and their circumstances whether they are entitled to 100% of pay.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you answered lots of people's questions coming through on that one. So it's a very comprehensive answer. Thank you. Nick, I do have a kind of specific, but I think it's a useful question to ask. So I have this person here asking a question. Now, they have a shop front. They were very happy with the shop front, but since coronavirus hit, the online business side of things has grown. Now, they don't think the shop staff are going to have the IT skills needed to grow the business online. Can they make them redundant, even though they do need staff, but they need staff with the right skills?
Well, yes, in principle, if there are new roles that require new skills, in principle, you can make those people without those skills redundant. But you do need to take care in how you go about it. You need to be able to justify what you're doing and show that the skills and qualifications are different. And you need to also act fairly. And one of the ways of acting fairly, of course, is to discuss the new roles with the existing staff and see if any of them do have the qualifications and skills or could relatively straightforwardly be trained up. So in principle, yes, of course, if the business is changing in a way that the old staff simply are not suitable, you can make those people redundant and recruit new staff. But it's really, really important that you do take advice before you go about that.
Right. Okay. So make sure we're taking advice. Absolutely. Catherine, one for you. Now, I want to support my employees. Now, I've heard this around, and we're getting questions on it. But they've heard that employers are given employees extended notice periods so they can remain in employment for as long as possible. Now, legally, is there any problems with doing this?
Well, generally no, and it is something that we are hearing a number of employers are choosing to do. So, just for an example, employers would have conducted a redundancy consultation process, possibly selection, and that will all have been completed, and employees will have been given notice of dismissal for redundancy. But the actual date that the redundancy takes effect, the employee's last day of employment, is deferred, and then the employee remains on furlough for longer than their contractual notice period that I mentioned before. So as I said, while they remain in employment, the employer can claim the furlough grant for them, but obviously they will need to make any additional costs as the furlough grant reduces, and pension contributions, national insurance costs, etc. But I think the proviso to that, and the common problem that we are seeing, is that employers are not making clear to employees what their entitlements are during this extended notice period. It's a term which is a bit misleading, really, because the notice period is correctly the notice in the contract of employment that the employer has to give to the employee when employment is terminated. And that is the time immediately before the last day of employment. So that needs to be made very clear in writing, as the pay during that time, as I mentioned earlier, may be different. As I said, generally 100% of normal pay from any agreed reduced furlough rate of pay for the rest of the time that the employee remains in employment. And of course, the other issue is, depending on the length of the so-called extended notice period, employees may find that they get another job during that time. And then, of course, an earlier termination date, leaving of employment, and that would be a matter of discussion and agreement between the employer and the employee.
Fabulous. Thank you, Catherine. Now, I've got a couple of questions here from people actually looking to avoid redundancies if possible, but it is quite challenging. So, Nick, one for you here. Have an employer, what they want to do is basically put their staff on furlough at 70% pay rather than make them redundant. Now, is that okay if the employees agree to it?
In a word, no, it's not. In order to claim the furlough grant, you've got to guarantee that you'll pay employees 80% of their normal pay. And if they're paid a fixed rate, that was their normal pay as at the 18th of March. If they have variable pay, it's based on a formula based on what they earned in the last year. They can't agree to less. So although in general terms, it's up to the employer and the employee to agree what the wages are, they can't agree to less, and the employer still claim the furlough money. So I'm afraid that's not an option. When the furlough grant decreases, as it will in September and October, I'm afraid the employer must still pay at least 80% of the normal pay.
Right, okay. And Catherine, I want to kind of follow up on what Nick's saying there, really, because I have a couple here. One that stands out, and this is quite common actually, and quite difficult. But there's a business here in the hospitality industry badly hit. Takings are down 40% on this time last year. What they're asking is, can they ask employees generally to take a pay cut so that we might avoid redundancies?
It is very, very sad, and unfortunately we are hearing, a lot of businesses are finding themselves in this really, really difficult financial situation and uncertainty, looking as far ahead as they're able to do. So what we're finding is that employers are looking at a number of different options to try and keep their businesses on an even keel, so they remain profitable and competitive, and to try and preserve jobs as far as possible. I think making people redundant is generally a last resort for employers. So looking at a cut in hours or a cut in pay is something that employees may be willing to agree to if that means that they can keep their job. But it is really important that you take advice about this, because that is a change to terms and conditions of employment, and unless the employees agree, then you may risk being in breach of contract, which would give rise to a potential claim. So we have some useful guidance on changing terms and conditions on the Mentor Live Hub, but in general terms, you're likely to be consulting with your employees, explaining why you're needing to consider making a pay cut, clearly setting out what your business case is, consider any alternatives that employments might put forward during the consultation. Sometimes, perhaps rather than the same pay cut across the board for all employees, it might be suggested a lower pay cut for those who are earning lowest. When that cut is going to take effect, and also importantly, if that's going to be reviewed, when the review dates are, and then any agreed changes must be confirmed in writing. It may be possible to dismiss if agreement can't be reached, but this should really be a last resort, and it is high risk. So you would absolutely definitely have to take advice if that's where you're finding yourself at the end of a consultation and you couldn't reach agreement.
Wow, okay, so lots of options, but each one just as challenging as the last, really. Okay, but yes, please get advice if needed. Now I'm going to move on. We do have more questions on restructuring, but we do have more to cover, unfortunately. But please check the FAQs if we haven't answered your question, as they do get updated. I'm going to move on to the working from home, coming into work. Just hot off the back of the announcement from Boris today. Before I delve into the Q&As on this, so Claire, I am still a bit confused after the announcement today. It seems a bit contradictory to me. Boris is saying offices should open, but they should work from home where possible. But they should come into work. I don't really know where I stand. So should we still be asking staff to work from home if they can work from home?
Yes, it's another clear, not clear that we've heard today, which is always helpful. So from today's message, obviously Boris's and the government's view is from the 1st of August, it will be down to the employer to make that decision. The government stance is they're saying it's safe to go to work if the employer has the controls in place to mitigate the spread and risk of COVID. So it all goes back again to, unfortunately, it is with yourselves as the employer that you have to manage that risk within your premises. So the main thing I would say is, the short answer is, if you can work from home, do work from home. We all know that the best control of COVID at the moment, and the scientific evidence, is reduce the time in the presence of people with COVID. So the best way to do that is working from home. Obviously, look at the business need. Look at it both from a moral and an ethical viewpoint. Okay, so look at it. Is it really needed? Can you work from home? Are there different means? Can you use the technology that's in place that we have been using? And if there is a need that you find, actually, we do need to get these people back into work, we do need to get them back into the offices, because okay, we've been able to work a bit remotely, but there are tasks and jobs that we cannot do without being in those premises. Then, okay, let's have a look at your risk assessment. Let's have a look at what controls you've got in place. It may mean that you need to look at reconfiguring the office space. It may mean that you need to look at staggering shifts. I know some of my clients have been bringing in people a couple of days a week and then swapping those over, or are they working in bubbles, such as the schools do at the moment? They're working in little groups. Can you have people that work in a bubble so they're only being in contact with those people? Have a look at those things. The best advice I can give at the moment is seek advice. Talk to your consultant, talk to your health and safety consultant. We can more than happy support you if we can understand your business, what you're looking at, and we can look at the controls that you're looking at putting in place. Most of my clients have been so good and so efficient in what they're doing. We know everyone out there is trying their best. So just come to us and we'll be more than able to help you.
Fabulous. So just to be clear, some of those are chargeable as well, so those services. Thank you, Claire. Just want to move on from the employment law side of things as well. Catherine, actually, I've got a few employers here that actually quite like the working from home and they want to do it permanently. Now, do they need to be amending their contracts?
Yes, absolutely. This is what we're hearing, that perhaps working from home is something that is far more effective than employers had realised, and we're hearing of businesses who are sending out questionnaires to their staff to find out if they'd be interested in continuing that, and it is proving to be popular. I think there are a number of things that employers need to think about, because the contract will state place of work, and that would need to be amended. But there are also issues around tax implications for travel expenses, business mileage reimbursement, issues around confidentiality from people working from home. What if people move their home address? Does that cause a problem? Are you still going to require them to come into meetings in the office? And I think all these things really need to be clarified and confirmed.
Right, okay. To flip it on its head then, Nick, one for you. What if staff are refusing to come to work because they're not satisfied that it's safe? Where do I stand on that?
Well, as Claire said, Boris Johnson has announced that on the 1st of August, the ball's really in the employer's court. First thing the employer needs to do is to make sure that they can show that they've got a safe workplace. So they do need to ensure that they can demonstrate they've got a COVID secure workplace. Mentor Live does have lots of information and support there, and there's also very useful information on the government website as well. But coming back into it seems to affect different people in different ways, and we've encountered this on our advice service, where we have shielding employers who are desperate to get back to work, and people who you think will be desperate to go back to work and they're not. And it's you can't deal with everyone as the same. So what I would do is make sure that staff are well briefed in advance about what you're doing, and you can brief them in a session like this on Zoom. So you can brief them what measures you're putting in place. You can have a Q&A. You can see if there's anything more that you can do. You should also consider possibly a phased approach, bearing in mind that having everyone back on day one may not be a good thing, because various people, everyone needs to know the systems that you put in place. Then maybe you could have a phased approach. Some people come back one day, some another. You could rotate people round, so people are working from home part of the time, but not fully, maybe with a view to everyone going back fully in due course. So there's various things that you can do. If you do have cases of people who really will not come back and engage in this, then you've really got to speak to those people one-to-one individually and try and understand what their issues are. And there may well be all sorts of issues. There's still likely to be childcare issues, I think, because we don't know how it's going to work with the schools, but certainly no schools are fully back yet. So that's one potential issue. And really just take advice, if you have access to advice on any issues that people come up with, because you've got to be really careful. As I said in answer to the previous question, you may have people who do have disabilities who you do need to make reasonable adjustments for. So it's important that you don't just adopt a blanket approach and start disciplining people without really understanding what the issue is. Those are my thoughts on that.
Right, thank you very much. Now, I have one question here for you, Catherine, which has come through. One of my employees that 24 weeks pregnant and they're refusing to come in, they don't believe it's safe. What are the options with that?
Well, this is a question that is less easy to give a sort of straightforward, definitive answer to. You know, the guidance that has been put out there, of course, is a little bit contradictory. Just to repeat what we've said around risk assessments and a legal duty to protect workers from harm. Clearly, the government has defined pregnant workers as clinically vulnerable, and as such could be at higher risk of severe illness from coronavirus. So they need to be especially careful and diligent about social distancing and hand hygiene. The Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists advise that pregnant women should follow the latest government guidance on staying alert and safe and avoid anyone who has symptoms suggestion of coronavirus. And you mentioned the 24 weeks. Women in their third trimester, so that's 28 weeks pregnant and onwards, you know, need to be particularly attentive to social distancing. Whereas when we look at the guidance for pregnant women in Scotland and Wales, yes, at increased risk of developing severe illness, but they need to continue to strictly follow the guidance on social distancing. And of course, that's currently 2 metres in Scotland and Wales, with the usual additional guidance around hand washing and surface cleaning and that sort of thing. So we have tried to put together some guidance again for everybody to start with using on Mentor Live. But the risk assessment is key to this, as I'm sure Claire would agree. And if that risk assessment identifies that there is an unacceptable level of risk to a pregnant employee, then there are some choices available to employers, but you know it's not an easy one. So obviously, if the employee can continue to work from home, but if it's a job where they need to work in an office or other environment away from home, then the employer has to consider whether there's any suitable alternative employment that can avoid them from that risk. But the terms and conditions of that alternative employment, you know, must be substantially less favourable for the pregnant employees. And if there is no suitable alternative work, then really it would be looking at medical suspension, and that would be on full pay. So I suppose the final solution would be to furlough that employee. And of course, that would depend upon them already having been furloughed for the 3 weeks by the 31st of July. So some options, but a challenging situation to deal with in terms of this slightly conflicting guidance.
Fabulous. Thank you. Very comprehensive again, Catherine. Thank you very much. Now, I have a final question on this coming back to work, which is for Claire, because businesses are reopening, offices are reopening, everything's slowly starting to open, but we do need to keep things clean and safe. So Claire, my question for you really is, how often should I have my premises cleaned, and are there any key areas that I need to be looking at?
It's a good question. It is a really good question at the moment, as you say. Unfortunately, like most of the questions today and answers, there isn't a straightforward, simple answer to this one. There's no clear guidance from the government or anyone on cleaning schedules. The main thing we would say is you need to look at your environment, your controls, and the type of work taking place. That would then deem how much cleaning and what you would need to do. So a good guide would be thorough clean twice a week, and toilets and areas like that to clean every day. You'd want to look at frequently cleaning working areas and equipment. So sanitations of all hand tools, controls, equipment after use. Obviously, remember the frequency of cleaning surfaces that are touched regularly, such as handles, control panels. And make sure that you've got adequate disposal for the cleaning items, because obviously these are classed as contaminant items once you clean them. So you've got to make sure you've got suitable and enough cleaning and bins and things around. The main thing, obviously, with COVID is the supporting research suggests that the virus lasts longer on plastics, metals, glass, the solid items such as that. So you'd want to consider how easy and practical certain items are to clean. So for instance, some of my clients that I've been speaking to recently that are hotel, restaurants that have high traffic areas with sort of customers and external contact, their cleaning frequency is a lot more and a lot higher, because they've obviously got items that will be touched, lift buttons, pens, phones, doorbells, things like that. Cutlery and things you wouldn't want to bring out until food's being served, for instance, with restaurants, so that there's no possible contamination from someone else that might have been sat there. A lot of restaurants are doing disposable menus, which is brilliant, because then obviously you've not got to continuously wipe them down, which would probably be a nightmare for most staff. And then other people, such as schools that I deal with, their difficulties obviously with fabrics and materials and toys and things, which are a lot more intricate parts, which means they're more difficult to clean. So those sorts of items have to be removed, is the government guidance, because you can't guarantee they're cleaned thoroughly enough to stop the contamination. So the main is, just try and avoid anything you can. And it's similar with hand dryers and bits and pieces like that. There was conflicting information at the beginning of the year, and still is really. The government's advice is, as long as you've got a way of properly drying the hands, so whether that's paper towels or electric hand dryer, then that's the main thing, because the virus spreads on moist areas. So just maintaining cleanliness is the main thing. So have a look at your risk assess controls, have a look at the tasks you're doing, and then assess how often you think it should be cleaned. You might want to consider your staff at the desks having their own cleaning stations. So at the end of the day, they've just got anti-bac wipes that they can wipe down keyboards with and things like that.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Now I'm going to chuck a question Nick's way, actually, because there are a couple of these coming through, and it's about basically employees going out for client meetings. So I'm talking about, site visits, meeting clients one-on-one, going out to their location from home or the office. Now, so I've got two questions on this. First of all, number one, they say they won't use the train because it's not an essential journey. What's the position?
Okay, it's perfectly reasonable, I think, at the moment for employees to be really concerned about doing business travel, because the guidance on using public transport is still very much don't use it unless there's no other possibility. So you're supposed to look at sort of bicycles, walking, scooters, pretty much anything other than getting on a train. And looking at what the government's published this morning, I was hoping to see that there'd be some loosening of the guidance on use of public transport, but there isn't, as far as I can see. Now, there may be, that may be coming. From an employer's point of view, they need to judge how important this aspect of the work is, bearing in mind that there's the availability of Zoom, there's the availability of Microsoft Teams, there's the availability of the phone. So actually, is that meeting a reasonable request for you to be considering in the light of the current pandemic? And I don't think there is a yes/no answer to this. It very much depends what the job is. I know that in our own line of business, that our health and safety consultants have been able to do risk assessments based on clients going around with their mobile phone cameras and doing it remotely. So it's amazing what you can do without the need for business travel, actually. But if business travel is essential, then yes, you do need to do specific risk assessments on it. It does look as if driving is going to be preferable to using public transport, simply because you meet far fewer people. You're in close contact with far fewer people when you're driving, and it may only be the client that you see. At the end of the visit, you're not coming into contact with anyone else. But of course, driving raises its own issues around, as we discussed earlier, whether the vehicle's properly insured, and whether the driver is sort of competent to drive for business. You need to check all those things out. So as I say, there isn't a simple answer to this. And as I say, I think at the moment, our advice to employers is really to consider all other options, then to risk assess it, and to take advice if you still have employees who feel that in spite of everything you've done, they still don't want to go out there.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to end today just with a couple of quick questions on furlough, we inevitably get loads of questions on furlough. It's a very complicated issue. So I do just want to touch on a couple of those. If I'm going to stick with you for a moment, Nick, if that's all right. So I've got, employers here who they brought some staff back from furlough. They need them to work extra hours. But can they pay some staff overtime whilst keeping others on furlough?
In principle, yes, the furlough scheme is flexible and does seem to allow that. But under the new flexibilities in the flexible furlough scheme, there's nothing to prevent you bringing other people back for short periods. It no longer has to be a sort of minimum period of 3 weeks for furlough. So actually, in the interests of fairness and also in the interests of getting people integrated back into the workforce, I think it would be better for people to start bringing people back from furlough to cover those extra hours rather than giving the people who are in the business back from furlough the additional hours. So that would be my view.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to end with a question for you, Catherine. I could grow arms and legs this one. But basically, for people on furlough, what if they're refusing to come into work because they're saying they've made prior arrangements? Now, I'm thinking in that based on the questions we've had today, childcare, for example, I'm thinking maybe they've gone abroad to see their family in the EU or further afield. They could have gone on holiday and booked holiday, that type of thing. Where do we stand in those scenarios?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and the other one, of course, is that they may have made other arrangements and found another job because they are allowed to under the furlough scheme take other employment. I mean, I think we just have to be sensitive that people have been out to the workplace for really quite a long time now, since the middle of March or whenever the place is locked down. So I think we just go back to the point, you need to talk to your employee. If you need them to come back to work, give them reasonable notice of the need to come back. But ultimately, it's about trying to find a way forward. Clearly, if somebody has no intention of coming back to work for you because they've got another job, then clearly it would be dishonest to continue to claim and for them to continue to claim the furlough grant. So in that case, I think you'd be setting some very, very clear expectations with a deadline or expect a resignation. Other issues around childcare. Again, I think that we are in a school holiday period, but this is not a normal school holiday period. So is it possible to find a creative solution? For example, employees have an entitlement to something known as parental leave, which is unpaid leave, but that might be something they might want to exercise, continue to work from home if possible. So really looking at the whole raft of solutions, but where there is an expectation and there is no a reasonable reason for them not to return to work, then I think it's about setting clear expectations and again, think each case you need to perhaps take some advice as appropriate, but potentially taking disciplinary action if it's a reasonable management instruction and that's not being followed. But many pitfalls, I think, for employers to get through before their workforce is back to the normal fully functioning arrangement.
Sorry, thank you very much there, Catherine. And I just want to, I'm going to come back to you, Nick, for one more, just to clarify yes or no, because someone's picked up on something you said. The flexible furlough, it is flexible, so you can put someone back on furlough after they've been off, just in work for a week, for example. Oh, Nick, you're on.
Sorry, best if I unmute myself, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. All right, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. So there will be an email with you shortly, giving useful website links, including a link to the Mentor website. If you click on the coronavirus read more button, you can register to use Mentor Live free of charge. The coronavirus section provides access to FAQs, letter templates, the risk assessments, which Claire and Catherine have mentioned, and much more. It also has the registration details for our future webinars. We do also offer a 3-month advice service, which is chargeable. And if you want to know more about any of our services, our contact details are available on the Mentor website. Now, as we mentioned at the start, this is the last in the current weekly series of the COVID-19 webinars from Mentor. As I say, that doesn't mean we'll be gone for good, but we will be taking a short break and we will be back next month with a new and improved webinar. New focus will be on how to help your business not just survive, but thrive in a post-COVID world. And please do take a minute to give us your feedback as you leave today's webinars. And that leaves me to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise today, and to thank all of you for joining us today as well. Thank you very much.